There is an episode of Rick and Morty that ends with Rick Sanchez trying to kill himself in his garage, while Jerry trims the lawn outside, and nobody comes to check on him. Not that night, not the next morning, nobody. Most people who have watched this show do not remember that episode exists. That is not because they are bad fans, it is because Rick and Morty has a specific type of episode that vanishes from memory while never fully leaving it. Episodes that end without a catchphrase, without a meme, without a single image you can send to someone and have it land without context. Episodes that hit too accurately to live in comfortable memory. This video is about those episodes, 8 of them, across 7 seasons, all of them forgotten, none of them weak. Welcome to Ricktopus. If long-form analysis like this is your thing, subscribing is free and it helps more than you would think. Alright, the garage is waiting. Why we forget the architecture of the show's blind spots. There is a specific type of Rick and Morty episode that disappears. Not the bad ones, not the ones that felt lazy or rushed or like the writers were running out of ideas. Those episodes stick around in a different way. People remember them because they have opinions about them, because they show up in arguments about which season went wrong. The episodes that truly vanish are different. They are sometimes the best episodes the show ever made. They end without a sound you can repeat. They resolve without an image you can screenshot and send to someone. They leave you sitting with something real, and then the next week you forget you watched them. This is not an accident. Rick and Morty is a show that became famous for a very specific set of moments. Rick burping mid-sentence, Morty screaming, an entire universe being created inside a car battery, a man turning himself into a pickle to avoid therapy. These are the moments the show is known for, and they are genuinely funny moments, genuinely creative moments, but they share a quality that goes beyond being good. They are moments that can survive being removed from their context. You can show someone who has never watched the show the clip of Rick saying he's a pickle, and they will find it funny, and they will understand it, and they will send it to 4 people. The moment travels. The moment lives on its own. The moments in the forgotten episodes cannot do that. The forgotten episodes, the ones this essay is going to spend 2 hours inside, end in ways that only work if you watched everything that came before them. They earn their weight through accumulation. When the final scene of one particular season 2 episode shows Rick Sanchez slumped over his workbench, alone in his garage, having just barely failed to kill himself while the rest of his family sleeps upstairs, that scene only destroys you if you watched the previous 20 minutes of the episode. If you only see the clip, you see a sad old man in a garage. If you watched the episode, you see someone who just lost the only thing that ever made him feel like himself, assembling a machine he clearly already knew how to build, moving through the familiar steps of something he has clearly thought about before. That distinction between a moment that travels and a moment that stays is the entire engine of what makes these episodes forgotten. Think about how most people experience television in the current era. They watch something, they finish it, and then within hours, they are already seeing pieces of it reflected back at them. A clip on a video sharing site, a screenshot in a group chat, a reference in a comment section somewhere. The show keeps existing after they finish watching it because other people are processing it out loud, because the moments are traveling, because the conversation is ongoing. This is how a show becomes culturally alive, not just through the act of watching it, but through the continuous conversation that follows. Rick and Morty is exceptionally good at producing moments that fuel that conversation, but the forgotten episodes produce something else instead. They produce a feeling that is harder to articulate and nearly impossible to share. When the episode ends, the viewer sits with it, and then, because there is nothing to send, nothing to clip, nothing that survives being taken out of context, the sitting is all that happens. No conversation follows. The episode goes quiet, and the quiet is where forgetting begins. Here is the other half of this. Rick and Morty is a show about a genius who has made a philosophy out of not caring. Rick Sanchez claims, loudly, repeatedly, in long speeches at the dinner table and in the middle of alien wastelands, and in the seconds before something catastrophic happens, that nothing matters. He says it with confidence. He says it like he believes it. He built an entire personality on top of the idea that caring is weakness, that attachment is a mistake, that the only rational response to an infinite universe is to treat it as a source of entertainment and nothing more. The popular episodes largely agree with Rick, or at least they let him get away with it. He is funny. He is right about most things. He wins. The audience is invited to find him cool, and a large portion of the audience accepts the invitation without much resistance. The forgotten episodes do not agree with Rick. Every single episode this essay covers is, at its core, an argument against Rick's stated philosophy. Not a loud argument, not the show putting a character on stage to say, "Rick, you are wrong about everything, you should feel bad." Something quieter and harder to shake. The show simply showing what it looks like when Rick's philosophy encounters the actual texture of being alive and fails to hold up. Rick claims not to care about anyone. An episode shows shows him spending an entire night alone in a garage with a machine pointed at himself after losing someone he loved. Rick claims control over every situation. An episode shows the creature he thought was just his dog looking him in the eye and asking for its lost dignity back, and Rick has no response to this. Rick claims the smart move is always detachment. An episode shows him finding a man who could have been his friend and choosing, through pure stubbornness, to lose that man instead. These are the episodes that stay quiet, because they are the episodes where Rick loses. Not in a fight, not to a villain. He loses to the basic requirements of being a person, over and over, in ways he cannot solve with a portal gun or a monologue about the meaninglessness of existence. And here is what makes those losses so difficult to carry away from the screen. The show never comments on them. There is no moment where another character looks at the camera and acknowledges what just happened. There is no swelling music telling you how to feel. Rick wakes up the next day, or the next episode, and he is the same Rick. He does not mention it. The show does not mention it. Life continues around the wound exactly as it did before the wound existed. This is very different from how most television handles emotional moments. Most television has a resolution. The character faces something hard, they change because of it, they carry the change forward. The audience feels the change and feels completed by it. The story has done its job. Rick and Morty's forgotten episodes offer none of that completion. They show you the wound, and then they show you someone going on as though the wound is not there. And that specific experience, watching someone absorb something real and refuse to let it alter their public face, is too close to actual life to be comfortable. It does not resolve. It does not travel. It sits in the part of the brain where the things you recognize about yourself live, and it stays there without being invited to leave. This is the architecture of why these episodes vanish from conversation while never fully vanishing from memory. There is one more piece to this. The forgotten episodes are not distributed evenly across the show's run. They tend to appear in the second episode slots of seasons, or in the quieter middle sections of a season when the audience is waiting for the next big moment. They are placed in positions that invite being skipped, or half-watched, or watched while doing something else. The premieres and finales get attention. The episodes that fall in between, especially the ones that do not tie into larger ongoing storylines, are where the quiet ones live. Someone who is not already fully paying attention will miss the thing that makes these episodes matter, because the thing that makes them matter arrives without announcing itself. A dog asking where its body parts went in broken mechanical speech with genuine dignity in its eyes. A suicide attempt that is never discussed again. A man sitting on a toilet on an alien planet wearing a crown that says King of Shit, understanding for the first time what his life actually looks like from the outside. These are not scenes that announce themselves. They arrive inside episodes that start as comedies and then do not finish as comedies, and if you were not paying close attention at the exact moment the episode changed registers, you missed it. The next 2 hours are for paying that attention. 8 episodes. Some from season 1, when the show was still figuring out what it was. Some from the middle seasons, when the show was at the height of its fame and quietly doing its most serious work in episodes nobody was cataloging. Some from the later seasons, when most of the conversation was about voice actor changes and whether the show still had it. All of them forgotten in the specific way that only the most honest episodes of any show get forgotten. Not dismissed, but absorbed and left behind, like something the audience processed without realizing they were processing it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first episode on this list aired in December 2013. It is the second episode the show ever made. It contains the seeds of almost every idea the rest of this essay is going to trace across 7 seasons, and almost nobody remembers it exists. Section 2, Lawnmower Dog. Season 1, Episode 2. The show before it knew it was famous. The second episode of Rick and Morty aired on December 9th, 2013. The show had been running for exactly 1 week. Nobody knew yet what it was going to become. The pilot had introduced the characters and established the basic dynamic. Rick is a genius, Morty is anxious, they go on adventures that are too dangerous for a 14-year-old boy, but pilots are always introductions. They tell you the setup. The second episode is where a show has to prove it has somewhere to go. Lawnmower Dog goes somewhere nobody expected. The episode has 2 separate stories running at the same time, which would become one of the show's signature moves. In one story, Rick and Morty enter the dreams of Morty's math teacher, a man named Mr. Goldenfold, to plant the idea that Morty deserves better grades. In the other story, the family dog, a small, dopey animal named Snuffles, who keeps urinating on the carpet, gets fitted with a brain-enhancing helmet that Rick builds in about 30 seconds because Jerry asked nicely. Both of these stories sound like jokes. The dream story is openly borrowed from the 2010 film Inception, and Rick admits this immediately and without embarrassment. He calls the dream-entering device a dream Inceptor. When Morty points out that Inception actually made sense, Rick tells him that Inception was confusing and stupid, and so is everyone's favorite movie. The dog story sounds like a one-note gag. What if the dumb dog got smart? That you would expect to resolve in 5 minutes with a punchline and then get forgotten. Neither story stays where it starts. The dream portion works in layers. Rick and Morty enter Mr. Goldenfold's dream, which is set on an airplane. Goldenfold turns out to be a more aggressive dreamer than Rick expected, pulling out 2 machine guns and fighting back. They end up grabbing one of Goldenfold's fantasy characters, a woman named Mrs. Pancakes, and diving into her dream to escape. Inside Mrs. Pancake's dream, there is an elaborate party full of people in masks. Inside that dream, there is a centaur who threatens to execute them for breaking the rules. They dive into the centaur's dream to escape, and that is where they find Scary Terry. Scary Terry is a direct parody of Freddy Krueger, the villain from the Nightmare on Elm Street horror films. He has bladed fingers. He has a burnt face. He chases Rick and Morty through multiple dream levels, screaming the word bitch as a verbal tic he cannot turn off. He calls everything bitch, including his greeting when someone brings him a gift. He is, on the surface, a horror movie villain remixed into a cartoon joke. But then, Rick and Morty stop running. They hide in a shack in a post-apocalyptic dream city, waiting for Scary Terry to give up. He eventually goes home. They follow him, and inside Scary Terry's house, they find something the episode has given no indication is coming. A wife, a child, a small, warm home. Scary Terry, monster of nightmares, has people he loves and a life he is trying to maintain. They enter his dream. And Scary Terry's dream is not a nightmare of blood and horror. It is a school anxiety dream. He is late to class. He forgot to wear pants. His teacher is calling on him and he does not know the answers. He is being humiliated in front of everyone and he cannot stop it, and he is terrified in the way that people are terrified in the most ordinary and human of dreams. Morty gives him a spare pair of pants. This is a small moment delivered without ceremony. Morty just hands them over. Scary Terry wakes up, sees Rick and Morty watching over him, and realizes they entered his dream to help him. He makes them breakfast. He agrees to help them navigate back up through all the dream levels, and he does so by killing each dreamer in sequence to force them awake, screaming as he blows up Mr. Goldenfold that this is because Goldenfold does not give Morty good grades. The dream story resolves. Morty gets his grades changed. Rick gets to be right about Inception being stupid. And buried inside all of that is a small, genuine moment of kindness extended to a creature everyone assumed was only capable of causing fear. This is the blueprint the show will use for the next 7 seasons, and it is all here in episode 2. Now the dog. Snuffles gets the helmet and immediately becomes obedient. He uses the bathroom correctly. He follows commands. The family is delighted. Jerry is relieved. Rick warns Jerry, in one of the episode's best early lines, that he thought the whole point of having a dog was to feel superior, and if Jerry pulls this particular thread, he might not like what he finds at the end of it. Jerry does not listen. Snuffles is smarter now, and he keeps getting smarter, because he can open the battery compartment of the helmet and add more batteries himself. He builds a robotic arm, he builds a speaker that lets him communicate in broken, halting sentences, and then he watches a documentary about dogs. The documentary shows dogs being bred over thousands of years to be smaller, cuter, less threatening. Wild hunters turned into soft, harmless creatures designed to be controlled. Snuffles watches this, and something changes in him. He reaches up and opens the helmet again. He adds more batteries. He adds more after that. By the time Summer finds him standing in her room in the middle of the night, wearing a full mechanical suit, speaking in clear and precise sentences, he has already renamed himself. His name is Snowball now. Snuffles was his slave name. He asks Summer where his body parts went, the parts that were removed, the operation that was done to him without his consent, before he was smart enough to object to it. Summer, who is a teenager trying to process the fact that her family dog is now a self-aware being in a robot suit asking about his stolen anatomy in the middle of the night, has no good answer. Snowball assembles an army. Other dogs get helmets. They build mechanical suits. The dogs stage a global takeover, reversing the human-dog relationship so that humans are kept as pets, walked on leashes, made to sleep in kennels. Jerry, in a moment of pure Jerry energy, attempts to assert dominance by urinating on the floor. The dogs make him rub his own face in it. Snowball allows Morty to live beside him in a position of comfort rather than captivity. Morty is the one creature Snowball still genuinely loves. Rick is somewhere else during all of this. Rick and Morty, from inside the dream levels, have lost track of how much time is passing in the real world. Rick explains the math. Dreams run at 1/100th the speed of reality, and dog time runs at 1/7 the speed of human time. A single night in the real world has become roughly a year inside Snowball's experience. When Rick and Morty finally get out, they return to a world that has already been conquered. Rick finds Morty and tells him something important. They are not actually in the conquered world. They are in Snowball's dream. The night the dogs captured the family, everyone went to sleep. Rick used the dream device to put himself and Morty inside Snowball's dream, inside the version of the future that Snowball most deeply wants. The conquest, the year of pet-human reversal, the comfortable life Morty has been living beside his loyal dog, who is now a revolutionary leader. None of it happened yet. Rick gives Morty a pill that will cause kidney failure. Not real kidney failure, dream kidney failure. Snowball, watching his beloved Morty collapse into illness inside the dream, pours the entire resources of his government into finding a cure. He bankrupts his revolution trying to save one sick boy. Snowball wakes up from the dream before he finds the cure. He wakes up and understands what the dream was trying to tell him. Conquering humanity, treating humans the way humans treated dogs, doing to them what was done to him, it would end exactly the same way, with cruelty, with heartbreak. He would become the thing he hated. He leads the dogs away instead, off-planet, somewhere else in the universe, where they can build something that is not built on the same foundation of dominance and loss. He says goodbye to Morty in a scene the show plays completely without irony or comedy. It is simply a goodbye between two beings who love each other and understand that love is not enough to make coexistence possible. The episode ends. The credits roll. In the post-credits scene, Rick is sitting in Scary Terry's dream classroom, which now has a new teacher, a hippie named Scary Glenn, who wants everyone to calm down. Rick and Scary Terry are students together. They appear to be high. They seem perfectly content. Now, here is the thing about this episode, and why it belongs in a 2-hour essay about forgotten Rick and Morty. Lawnmower Dog is not forgotten because it is bad. It is not forgotten because nothing happens in it. It is forgotten because it aired second, before the show had an audience that was paying close enough attention to catalog it, before the fandom infrastructure existed that would later trace every episode back to its origins and analyze every scene for what it set up later. But look at what this episode actually contains. It contains the first version of the idea that Rick's inventions create consciousness he did not plan for and cannot control. The helmet was meant to make Snuffles obedient. What it actually did was create a being capable of genuine grief, genuine moral reasoning, and genuine love. This will happen again. Rick builds things, those things develop inner lives, and Rick is never fully prepared for what that means. It contains the first version of the show's argument that the things we do to creatures weaker than us leave marks we cannot easily explain away. Snowball does not hate humans because he is evil. He hates what was done to him, and he extended that hatred outward until he caught himself doing the same thing and chose to stop. That is a more sophisticated moral arc than most hour-long dramas bother with. It contains the first version of the show using parody as a way to find something real inside something borrowed. The Inception parody is funny, but the reason Rick and Morty help Scary Terry is not funny. They help him because he is suffering in a dream about being humiliated at school, which is one of the most universal and human fears that exists. And Morty responds to that suffering with a practical act of kindness. The show took a Freddy Krueger knockoff and used him to make a genuine point about empathy. It contains the first version of the show's most recurring emotional move. A creature who seems like a joke turns out to have real interiority, and the moment you register that interiority, the comedy shifts into something else entirely. Snuffles was the joke. Snowball was not. The name change is the moment the episode declares itself. When Snowball tells Summer that Snuffles was his slave name, he is not just being funny. He is drawing a direct line to every moment in human history where a person was given a name by someone who owned them, and then, upon gaining their own voice, rejected it. The show named this connection itself. The character choosing the name Snowball is a direct reference to the revolutionary pig named Snowball in Animal Farm, a book about animals overthrowing their human oppressors, only to find that power corrupts the ones who take it. The episode aired in 2013. It was the second episode of a new show that most people thought was a gross-out comedy about a drunk scientist and his nervous grandson. Inside that second episode was a decolonization narrative, a meditation on the ethics of what we do to animals, a surprisingly moving farewell scene between a boy and his dog, and a complete prototype of every important structural and emotional move the show would make for the next decade. Nobody was taking notes. The audience was still figuring out whether they liked the show. That is why this episode is forgotten. It was the second episode. Everything it set up would get built out later, in episodes that got more attention, in seasons with bigger audiences and more coverage. By the time the show became the cultural phenomenon it became, Lawnmower Dog was already buried under 50 episodes that people had analyzed more thoroughly, quoted more often, turned into more memes. But everything that comes later in this essay. Every quiet moment, every creature gaining unexpected interiority, every time Rick's plan produces something he did not account for, has its roots here. The blueprint was laid out in week 2. Most people walk past it without stopping. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings us to the episode that ran in the same week slot of Season 2. The one that tried to do what Lawnmower Dog did and ended up doing something stranger and more uncomfortable, and got forgotten for entirely different reasons. Section 3. Interdimensional Cable 2. S2E8. What happens when a sequel is honest about being a sequel? There is a moment near the beginning of this episode where an alien nurse walks up to Rick and asks what he is doing. Rick says he is doing a sequel. The nurse says she does not understand. Rick says neither does he. They pretty much nailed it the first time. That exchange is the most honest thing any television show has ever said about its own sequel episode, and it happens in the first 3 minutes. And then the episode continues for another 19 minutes as though Rick did not just describe exactly why sequels fail. This is either the most self-aware move the show ever made or the most self-defeating one, and the fact that you cannot fully decide which is what makes this episode more interesting than the reputation it has been left with. Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate, aired on September 20th, 2015. It is the 8th episode of Season 2. It is a follow-up to Rick's Minutes, which was the 8th episode of Season 1, which is either a fun piece of planning or a coincidence, depending on who you ask. Rick's Minutes is remembered as one of the greatest episodes the show ever produced. Interdimensional Cable 2 is remembered, when it is remembered at all, as the lesser version. The episode people watched once and did not return to. This reputation is not entirely wrong, but it is not entirely right either. To understand why, you have to understand what made Rick's Minutes work, because the 2 episodes share a premise and almost nothing else. In Rick's Minutes, Rick builds a device that lets the family watch television from alternate dimensions. The shows they watch are improvised. Justin Roiland and the writing team recorded themselves making up fake TV shows on the spot, with all the hesitations and dead ends and strange tangents left in. The result is television that feels genuinely random in a way scripted television never does. Nobody knows where the bit is going because nobody decided where it was going before they recorded it. The audience can feel this, and the feeling is part of the joke. But what made Rick's Minutes more than just a collection of weird, improvised skits was the story happening at the same time. While Rick and Morty watch Cable in the living room, Summer is upstairs considering running away from home. She feels like an accident. She knows her parents only got together because Beth got pregnant, and she has constructed from this knowledge a belief that her existence is a mistake that everyone around her is too polite to acknowledge. Morty finds her. He tells her something that the episode earns through every strange, improvised, seemingly disconnected minute that preceded it. He tells her that nobody in any version of reality belongs there. He and Rick have looked at the alternate timelines. They have seen the versions of the family where different choices were made, and in those timelines, the people who exist instead of Summer are not happier. They are just different people with different problems. There is no version of reality where things work out perfectly. You just pick a reality and you live in it. That conversation lands with the full weight of everything that came before it, because the random television had primed something in the audience. All those weird, purposeless, disconnected shows from other dimensions had spent 20 minutes making the point that existence is arbitrary, that the universe is full of things that have no reason for being the way they are, and that this is simply the condition of being alive anywhere. Morty's speech to Summer was the episode's thesis, and the improvised cable was the evidence. Interdimensional Cable 2 has the same premise. The family is stuck somewhere. Rick rigs up the interdimensional cable. They watch weird shows from other dimensions. But the story running alongside the cable is different. This time, it belongs to Jerry. Jerry has eaten something from Rick's second freezer drawer. It turns out to be a dangerous mutant bacteria that Rick was keeping for research purposes. Jerry is rushed to St. Gloopy Noop's hospital, an alien medical facility somewhere in space. The doctors treat him. He survives. He is going to be fine. And then, one of his doctors presents him with a situation. There is a patient in the hospital named Shrimply Pibbles. Shrimply Pibbles is, by every available measure, the most important living being in the known universe. He is a galactic civil rights leader. He has dedicated his life to the liberation of oppressed species across countless planets. He is beloved on a scale that is almost impossible to describe. Werner Herzog, the German filmmaker who has spent decades making documentaries about obsession and the edge of human endurance, voices Shrimply Pibbles, which is a casting choice so precisely correct that it loops back around to being funny. Shrimply Shrimply Pibbles is dying. His heart is failing, and Jerry's body contains something that could save him. Jerry's anatomy has produced an organ that is, by the specific measurements required for the transplant, a perfect biological match for Pibbles' failing heart. The doctors are asking Jerry to donate it. The organ they are asking about is Jerry's penis. This is where the episode walks a line that most comedy would not attempt. The setup is obviously designed for maximum comedic absurdity. The most important being, in the universe needs Jerry Smith's penis to survive, which means Jerry Smith's absurd, embarrassing, disaster-prone body is the only thing standing between the galaxy and catastrophe. That is funny. The show knows it is funny. Rick knows it is funny. The hospital knows it is funny, because the entire alien staff is struggling to maintain professionalism while delivering this news. But the episode is not actually interested in the absurdity of the situation. It is interested in what Jerry does with it, because Jerry, at first, agrees. He has spent his entire existence wanting to matter. He has spent seasons being the person in every room who everyone else finds slightly embarrassing, slightly less than, slightly not enough, and now a doctor is standing in front of him telling him that his body, his specific, particular, laughed-at body, is the only thing in the universe that can save the greatest person who has ever lived. Jerry agrees immediately. Of course he does. This is the first time in Jerry's life that he has been genuinely necessary. Then he talks to Beth. Beth's reaction is not what Jerry expected. She is not moved by his willingness to sacrifice. She is uncomfortable. She does not want Jerry to do this. The conversation that follows reveals that Jerry's agreement was not purely selfless. It was about being seen as a good person, about finally having a story to tell, about finally being the man in the room who did the extraordinary thing. Beth sees this. She identifies it clearly. And suddenly the sacrifice does not feel as clean as it did when Jerry was alone with it. Jerry starts looking for a way out. He tries to publicly shame Shrimply Pibbles by revealing that Pibbles breathes heroin to survive. This backfires immediately when the doctors explain that heroin is simply the atmospheric component that Pibbles' species requires to live, the way humans require oxygen. It is not a drug addiction, it is just biology. Jerry has attempted to destroy the reputation of the universe's greatest civil rights leader based on a misunderstanding he did not bother to check. The episode does not let Jerry off the hook for this. It keeps him in the situation, keeps making him answer for his own selfishness and cowardice, right up until the moment when he makes a decision so wrong that it gets him shot multiple times by hospital security. He tries to force the surgery himself. He does not want to be the man who donated the organ out of genuine goodness. He wants to be the man who forced the situation to resolve on his terms, which is the same cowardice wearing a different costume. He survives because the alien hospital can treat multiple gunshot wounds to the head as a minor inconvenience. The other donors come through. Pibbles gets a synthetic replacement. Nobody needed Jerry in the end. This is the story Interdimensional Cable 2 is actually telling, and it is a genuinely good story about a genuinely understood character. Jerry's selfishness is not played as pure comedy. The episode is precise about the specific type of selfishness it is. The selfishness of a person who wants to be good, but wants more to be seen as good, and cannot separate these two desires clearly enough to act with any integrity. The problem is that this story keeps getting interrupted by the cable. The improvised television segments in Interdimensional Cable 2 are funny. Some of them are very funny. There is a show called Lil Bits about food served in extremely small portions. There is a show called Jan Quadrant Vincent 16 that is a parody of action films starring multiple copies of the actor Jan Michael Vincent at the same time. There is a show called The Adventures of Steely about a creature that steals things. There is How Did I Get Here, which features a woman who is in the hospital waiting room and then appears, without explanation, balanced on top of a street lamp in a different city. Rick advises everyone to stay away from the coffee machine. There is also, buried inside these cable segments, the single most important piece of Rick and Morty world-building trivia that exists. The show How They Do It, which explains in careful detail exactly how a plumbus is manufactured. A plumbus is a household item used across the universe. Everyone has one. The show had introduced the plumbus in season 1 as a background joke, an object with a ridiculous name that appeared in alien settings without explanation. Interdimensional Cable 2 contains the only canonical explanation of the plumbus manufacturing process. It involves schleem, a dingle, a grumbo, and several steps that make no sense and perfect sense simultaneously. The plumbus explanation is now permanent Rick and Morty lore. It is referenced in merchandise, in fan discussions, in lists of the show's most iconic moments. It exists only in the episode that everyone forgets. The Personal Space Show is also in this episode. A man who is obsessed with keeping his personal space clear of intrusions, including his own own skin, hosts a program about his philosophy. He removes his skin to prove his point. This is one of the stranger minutes of television the show has produced, and it exists in Interdimensional Cable 2, and most conversations about the show's weirdest moments do not mention it. Here is what the episode is doing that its reputation does not give it credit for. Rick's minutes worked because the cable and the character story were talking to each other. The randomness of the cable was the point of Morty's speech. Interdimensional Cable 2 does not have that same connection. The cable and Jerry's story run alongside each other, without really speaking to each other, which makes the episode feel less unified, less like a complete argument. But Rick's opening admission that this is a sequel, and sequels are a mistake when you already nailed it, is the episode being honest about exactly this problem. The show knows the cable segments are not landing as well this time. It knows the formula is working less cleanly, and rather than pretend otherwise, it opens with Rick saying so out loud in the first 3 minutes before any of it happens. This is a strange creative choice. Admitting your sequel is going to be worse than the original before the sequel starts does not make the sequel better, but it does something unusual. It shifts what the audience is watching for. Instead of watching for the cable segments to be as good as the first time, the audience is now watching to see what the show does with the admission. The sequel becomes a document of creative honesty rather than creative triumph. And within that frame, the Jerry story lands differently. Jerry failing to be as good as he wants to be, in an episode that openly admitted it cannot be as good as it wanted to be, creates an accidental mirror. The episode and its main character are doing the same thing, falling short of their best version of themselves and having to continue anyway. This is not what the show intended. There is no evidence anyone in the writer's room planned this connection, but it is there, and it is real, and it is one of the reasons the episode rewards attention that most people never give it. Interdimensional Cable 2 is the episode that gave Rick and Morty its most quoted piece of alien trivia. It is the episode where Jerry's defining character weakness gets its clearest articulation. It is the episode where the show admitted in its first minute that it could not live up to what it had already done, and then kept going anyway. That willingness to keep going, despite knowing you have already done the best version of the thing, is, as this essay will keep returning to, one of the most consistently Rick and Morty ideas the show has ever explored. __quote _2 __. But where the cable episodes play that idea for comedy, the next episode on this list plays it for something that stops being funny very quickly and ends in a garage at night with a machine that Rick has clearly built before. Section 4. Autoerotic Assimilation. S2E3. The show buries its most important scene. Most people who have watched this episode remember the race war. That sounds like a strange sentence. But if you ask someone who has seen Autoerotic Assimilation what happens in it, the race war is usually what they lead with. Rick runs into an old partner named Unity. Unity is a hive mind, a single consciousness that has taken over every living body on an entire planet, speaking through all of them simultaneously. The planet's population, now fully controlled by Unity, had previously been divided into groups based on the number of nipples each group had. Without Unity's control holding everything together, those groups immediately go to war with each other over the nipple difference. Summer accidentally causes this by encouraging the population to reclaim their free will, which they do, and then immediately use to start shooting at each other. This is funny. It is meant to be funny. The show is making a point about how quickly freedom gets weaponized by groups who have historical reasons to hate each other, but it is making that point through a joke about nipples, and the joke lands, and people remember it. What people do not remember is the last 4 minutes of the episode. Autoerotic Assimilation aired on August 9th, 2015. It was written by Ryan Ridley and directed by Brian Newton. It is the 3rd episode of Season 2, which means it aired early in the season, before the audience had fully locked into the rhythm of what Season 2 was going to be. It is rated TV-14, which is the standard rating for the show. Nothing about the way it was packaged or presented suggested it was going to end the way it ends. The setup is straightforward by Rick and Morty standards. Rick, Morty, and Summer are traveling through space and pick up a distress signal from an alien ship. Rick explains his standard approach to distress signals. 9 times out of 10, the ship is full of dead aliens and free supplies. 1 time out of 10, it is a deadly trap. He is willing to roll those odds. They board the ship, find a few surviving crew members, and those crew members are immediately absorbed into a hive mind that has already taken over most of the vessel. The hive mind knows Rick. It speaks to him through the bodies of the crew members it has absorbed, using their voices and faces in unison. Rick is surprised in a way he almost never is. He knows this entity. He used to be involved with this entity. The entity's name is Unity. Unity is voiced by Christina Hendricks. This is important not as a celebrity fact, but as a creative decision. Hendricks has a voice that carries warmth and intelligence simultaneously, and Unity requires both. Unity is not not a villain. Unity is a being who is genuinely trying to make things better on every planet it absorbs, eliminating crime, eliminating poverty, eliminating conflict, while also being fully aware that it is doing this by removing every individual's ability to choose anything for themselves. Unity contains the contradiction of every well-meaning system that solves problems by taking away the freedom that makes people human. Rick and Unity resume their relationship immediately and without much deliberation. This is who they are together. They do not build toward it. They simply are it, because they have been it before, and the muscle memory of being it is stronger than whatever made them stop the first time. What follows is the debauchery portion of the episode, which is the portion people are most likely to clip and share. Rick makes requests. Unity fulfills them using the bodies of the planet's entire population. There are stadiums involved. There are costumes. Rick asks Unity to assimilate a giraffe. The episode earns its TV-14 rating in this section without technically crossing into anything that would require a harder one. Meanwhile, Summer and Morty are being looked after by Unity, and Summer develops a political objection to what Unity is doing. An entire planet of people has had their individual consciousness overridden. They cannot choose. They cannot disagree. They cannot be themselves in any meaningful sense. Summer finds this monstrous, and she is not wrong to find it monstrous, and she acts on her objection by encouraging some of the population to reclaim their independence. They reclaim it. The race war starts. Unity loses control of sections of the population as the parties Rick and Rick's requests have been requiring Unity to maintain begin to drain its ability to hold everything together. Morty and Summer nearly get caught in the crossfire before Unity's SWAT team extracts them. Summer has learned something complicated. The freedom she advocated for was real and right, and the people who got it immediately used it to try to kill each other. The episode does not tell her she was wrong to want it. It also does not tell her she was right. Morty and Summer find Rick and tell him he needs to go home. They tell Unity that Rick and Unity are bad for each other. They leave. Rick stays. Then Unity leaves instead. Unity leaves notes. Multiple notes, because Unity speaks through multiple bodies, and so the goodbye is delivered in many handwritings and many styles, all saying variations of the same thing. The notes say that Unity and Rick are too similar, that Rick's presence makes Unity into a worse version of itself, that being with Rick means losing track of what Unity was trying to do and becoming consumed by what Rick wants instead. The most precise line in the notes says that Unity loses who it is and becomes part of Rick, because, in a strange way, Rick is better at what Unity does without even trying. This is the line that unlocks the entire episode. Rick's power is not his intelligence. His intelligence is the visible part, the part people talk about. His actual power is gravity. Every person and every entity that gets close enough to Rick begins to orbit him. They start doing things his way. They start measuring themselves against his standards. They lose their own center of gravity and start circling his instead. Unity, a being that absorbs entire planets and speaks through millions of bodies simultaneously, cannot maintain its own identity when Rick is in the room. It becomes part of Rick's world instead of its own. This is why Unity leaves. Not because the relationship is bad in simple ways, because the relationship is the most genuinely expressive version of both of them, and what they most genuinely are together is a disaster that neither of them can stop. Rick comes home. He walks into the house. Beth confronts him about something she found in the basement, an alien named Blim Blam, who is chained up in a secret underground room that nobody knew existed. Blim Blam is a Korblakian. His species eats babies. He came to Earth to eat babies. Rick caught him and chained him up specifically because Blim Blam has a disease called space AIDS, and Rick was working on a cure that he intended to sell for a significant profit. Beth is upset about the chained alien in the secret basement room, which is understandable. Rick concedes immediately. He does not argue, he does not explain himself or make a speech about why the ends justify the means or how this is actually fine if you think about it from a universal perspective. He just quietly agrees that Beth is right and retreats to the garage. This is unusual enough that it functions as a warning. Rick losing an argument without putting up a fight is not something Rick does. The audience should notice it. Most audiences do not, because the episode has given them a lot to track, and because Rick's capitulation is quiet and quick and surrounded by other things happening. In the garage, Rick builds something. The components of what he builds were already visible in the garage earlier in the episode. Jerry was in the garage looking for a weed whacker in an earlier scene, and the pieces were there on the workbench, unremarked upon, just objects in the background. The episode did not draw attention to them. They were just there. Rick assembles these pieces into a death ray, a machine designed to vaporize whatever it is aimed at. He knows how to build it quickly because he has clearly thought about building it before. He opens a storage unit in the garage and unfreezes a small creature that has been kept in suspended animation. The creature is deformed. It is in constant pain. It screams screams with the specific sound of something that has been suffering and cannot stop and does not understand why. Nobody knows exactly what this creature is. The most common theory among viewers is that it is a Cronenberg, one of the monsters from the Season 1 episode where Rick turned the entire population of Earth into body horror creatures that Rick kept from the dimension they abandoned. This has never been confirmed. The show has never explained it. What matters is not what the creature is. What matters is what Rick does. He comforts it. He holds it and speaks to it gently, in the way you would speak to something that is hurting and that you are trying to reassure. He is genuinely tender with this creature, in a way the episode has not shown him being tender with anything or anyone else. And then, he aims the death ray at it and ends its suffering. He turns the death ray toward himself. He sets up the machine. He positions it. He sits in the chair in front of it. The machine begins its preparation cycle, warming up toward the moment it will fire. Rick passes out. He has been drinking through the entire episode, and the alcohol takes him under before the machine finishes preparing. He slumps forward onto his workbench. The machine does not fire because he is no longer holding the trigger. He is alive because he drank too much to stay conscious long enough to kill himself. The camera pulls back. The garage is quiet. Rick is slumped at his workbench. The episode does not cut to another character reacting. It does not play dramatic music. It does not give the audience a moment to process what just happened before moving to something else. It simply pulls back, and the garage gets smaller in the frame, and Rick gets smaller in the frame, and the night continues around him. The next morning arrives. Rick is still slumped at the workbench. The camera is outside the garage now, through the window. Jerry walks into frame in the driveway, picks up a weed whacker, and starts trimming the edges of the lawn. He does not look at the garage. He does not check on Rick. He found his weed whacker, and he is using it, and the morning is the morning. Nobody checked on Rick. Not that night, not the next morning. The episode ends there, with Jerry and the weed whacker, and Rick visible through the garage window, and the audience left to absorb the fact that a man nearly died in his garage, and nobody in the house knew, and nobody came. One reviewer at the time described this ending as containing an unspeakably agonizing shot where an entire night and following day pass without a single person, including Morty, coming to check on him. That description is accurate. It is also incomplete. What makes the shot agonizing is not just the loneliness of it. It is the normalcy. Jerry is doing a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning task. The sun is up, the neighborhood looks fine, the world is entirely undisturbed by what almost happened in that garage 6 hours ago. This is the show's most precise statement about Rick Sanchez, and it is buried in the 3rd episode of the 2nd season, under a race war about nipples and a giraffe request and a long section about a hive mind who used to date a genius. Rick tells everyone that nothing matters. He has built his entire way of moving through the world on that statement. He says it constantly, and he seems to mean it, and most of the audience has at some point found it kind of cool. The garage is the rebuttal. The machine that was already assembled before the episode started is the rebuttal. The creature he kept in frozen storage and comforted before ending its pain is the rebuttal. Someone who genuinely believed nothing mattered would not have kept that creature, would not have comforted it, would not have sat down in that chair. Rick cares enormously. Rick cares so much that losing the one entity in the universe who reflected him back at himself without fear was enough to send him to that garage. The nihilism is not a philosophy. It is a wall. And on the other side of the wall is whatever made Rick build that machine and put it in his garage and leave the components sitting out where anyone could see them. The show will return to this question. It will not answer it for several more seasons, but the components are visible in this garage, in this episode, in the 3rd episode of season 2, if you know to look. __quote _3 __. Most people missed it the first time. And the next episode on this list proves that missing things is sometimes the entire point, because the show's most deceptively devastating scene is built around an object so mundane that most viewers spend the first 15 minutes laughing at it before they understand what it actually is. Section 5. The Old Man and the Seat. S4E2. A poop joke that won't let you go. The title of this episode is a reference to a famous novel. The Old Man and the Sea was written by Ernest Hemingway. It is about an aging fisherman who goes out alone into the ocean and hooks the greatest fish of his life after months of catching nothing. He fights the fish for days. He wins. He ties the fish to the side of his boat and begins the long journey home. And by the time he reaches shore, the sharks have eaten everything. He arrives with nothing but the skeleton. He goes home and falls asleep, and the next day, he goes back to the ocean. The episode knows you do not need to have read the book for the reference to work, but if you have, every scene with Rick Rick and Tony lands differently. The fish was not the point. The going out alone was the point. The willingness to fight for something in the dark with no audience was the point. And coming home with nothing and going back out anyway is the most Hemingway thing Rick Sanchez has ever done. Except Rick is too stubborn to let himself understand that is what he is doing. The Old Man in the Seat aired on November 17, 2019. It was written by Michael Waldron and directed by Jacob Hare. It is the second episode of Season 4. According to viewing numbers recorded at the time, it was the lowest rated episode of the entire series up to that point, not counting the Season 3 premiere that aired without any announcement. The lowest rated episode the show had produced to that point. Most people did not watch it, and most of the people who did watch it filed it away under the category of fine and moved on. The premise is this: Rick has a secret. He is a shy pooper. He cannot use the bathroom comfortably if there is any chance someone might be nearby. He has solved this problem in the most Rick Sanchez way imaginable. He found a beautiful alien planet with no sentient inhabitants, installed a single toilet on it in a location with a perfect view, and has been visiting it regularly for private bathroom use. The planet is genuinely stunning. The art direction of these scenes treats it like a nature documentary. Sweeping alien landscapes, glittering aurora lights in the sky, the sound of running water nearby. Rick walks through tall grass on this planet with the specific calm of someone who has a place that is entirely theirs. Then he finds a broken tree branch. Rick pulls out a scanning device and determines that something with hands broke the branch. Something with hands was on his planet. Rick's face goes still in a way that means someone has made a catastrophic mistake. He tracks the intruder through an alien underworld. He gets into a standoff with a fly gangster who runs a bar for frogs. He accidentally starts and finishes a war between robots and lizard people, resolving it in about 45 seconds as a side effect of looking for information. He navigates bureaucracy in an alien office building. All of this escalating, chaotic, galaxy-crossing investigation is happening because someone used his toilet. The person he finds is named Tony. Tony is an alien. He is small and soft-spoken. He works in a cubicle in a quiet office. He lost his wife to illness sometime before the episode begins. He is, by every available measure, a completely ordinary and slightly sad person, living a life that has not gone as well as he hoped. He is also a shy pooper, which is how he found Rick's planet. He stumbled onto it accidentally, understood immediately what it was and why it was the way it was, and came back because it was the most peaceful place he had ever been. Rick finds Tony and tells him what is going to happen. He is going to die. Rick wants to know where Tony would like this to occur. Tony asks the receptionist if conference room 3 is available. What follows is one of the more surprising conversations Rick has in the entire series. Tony sits down and begins talking to Rick the way someone talks when they have nothing left to lose. He is not afraid of Rick because he has already lost the thing he was most afraid of losing. His wife is gone. The toilet was his way of having somewhere to sit with that. He tells Rick, simply and without drama, what shy pooping actually is. Tony says that shy pooping is a pointless attempt to control something. You want to take the one part of your life you genuinely think belongs only to you and protect it from a universe that takes whatever it wants. Rick, who has crossed the galaxy and started a robot war because someone used his private toilet, is being told by a small, sad alien in a conference room that the toilet is not about hygiene or privacy. It is about the terror of having nothing that is only yours. Rick does not have a response to this. Tony keeps going. He tells Rick that after Rick originally threatened to kill him, he thought about what Rick said and how much he needed to hear it. Then he thought about why Rick was saying it and who Rick was really saying it to. He tells Rick that Rick needs the same thing Tony needed, someone to give him permission to live. This is the second most precise thing anyone has ever said to Rick Sanchez on this show. The most precise was Dr. Wong's speech in the Pickle Rick episode of Season 3. But Dr. Wong is a professional. She is paid to see people clearly. Tony is a grieving alien in a conference room who walked into the situation by using the wrong toilet and somehow ended up delivering a diagnosis that Rick cannot argue with. Rick lets Tony live. He cannot bring himself to go through with it. Deep down, Rick knows the toilet is not a big deal. He knows he could find another planet, install another toilet, and the thing he is trying to protect would be just as protected. But the knowing does not change what he does, because Rick's flaw is never a lack of information. It is the gap between what he knows and what he can make himself do. He leaves Tony alive. He also leaves Tony a parting gift. He rigs the toilet with a complex system that will activate if Tony ever returns. The system generates holographic versions of Rick that will mock whoever sits on the toilet, making fun of them for their loneliness and their need for a private place, and their sad, small small attempt to own one corner of the universe. Rick built this as a prank for Tony. He built it to humiliate Tony the next time Tony came back. Rick gets a message. Tony is dead. He quit his job, took up skiing, and died in a ski accident while trying to live his life more fully after the conversation in the conference room. Tony took what Rick said and used it. Someone gave Tony permission to live, and Tony went out and lived and died doing it. Rick goes to the funeral. He gives Tony's father money. He provides Tony's father with the means to potentially clone Tony, while clarifying that cloning is not the same as bringing someone back. He tells Tony's father, clearly and more than once, that he and Tony were not friends. Then he goes back to the planet. He sits on the toilet. The holographic Ricks appear. They were programmed to mock Tony for his loneliness, for his need for a private place, for being a shy pooper alone on an alien planet with no one who knows where he is. They say all of these things. And because Tony is dead and will never sit on this toilet again, the holograms say all of these things to Rick. A crown appears. It reads, King of Shit. Rick sits on his private toilet on his private planet under his private sky, wearing a hologram crown that he made for someone else, listening to versions of himself list every true thing about why a person builds a private toilet on an alien planet and visits it alone. The rain starts. The holograms keep talking. This is what the episode was always going to end up being. Not a poop joke. A portrait of a man who set a trap for someone and outlived them, and now has to sit in the trap himself. The reason this episode gets overlooked is the same reason The Old Man in the Seat is a strange and understated title for an episode about a man chasing someone across the galaxy for using his bathroom. The serious content is buried so completely inside the silly premise that many viewers finish the episode without fully registering that the silly premise was never the point. You have to let the toilet be a toilet for 20 minutes before the episode will tell you what the toilet actually is. Most people laugh at the toilet. They are supposed to. The show needs them to laugh at the toilet. If the audience spends the whole episode aware that this is a portrait of loneliness, the ending loses its force. The crown landing on Rick's head only works as a devastating moment if the audience spent most of the episode thinking it was a comedy about pooping. Rick sat on that toilet and got mocked by himself for being exactly as alone as he is. And then, because this show never lets Rick's worst moments linger long enough to force a real change, the next episode continued as though none of it happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the pattern is becoming clearer now. Rick in the garage, Rick on the toilet, Rick losing people before he can decide to keep them. The show keeps returning to the same shape, and the next episode on this list turns that shape over completely, because it is not about Rick at all. It is about what happens to the people inside his house when the show finally pays attention to the one member of the family who has been quietly keeping score the whole time. Section 6, Night Family, 6E5, Summer as the smartest person in the room. This episode opens with a poem. Before any character appears, before any joke lands, before Rick does anything weird or Morty panics about anything, the screen shows a title card with lines from a poem by T.S. Eliot. The poem is called Fragment of an Agon. The title card has a VHS-style interference effect over it, like a tape that has been recorded over too many times. It looks like the opening of a horror film from the 1980s. This is the show telling you exactly what kind of episode you are about to watch. Most people miss the signal because they are not expecting a Rick and Morty episode to open with T.S. Eliot. They assume it is a joke and wait for the punchline. The punchline never comes because the poem is not the joke. The poem is the warning. Night Family aired on September 25th, 2022. It was written by Rob Schraub and directed by Jacob Hare. It is the 5th episode of season 6. The episode has a 100% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics who reviewed it at the time of airing. It is also almost never discussed in conversations about the best Rick and Morty episodes, which is the specific contradiction this essay keeps returning to. The setup takes about 3 minutes. Beth cannot sleep because Jerry snores. She goes to the living room couch. She finds Rick in the living room doing sit-ups in the dark, completely unresponsive to her presence. He finishes his set and leaves without acknowledging her. At breakfast, Rick explains. He has purchased a device from a system called the Gooby Jube system. The device is called a somnambulator. The somnambulator allows Rick to program his unconscious body to perform tasks while he is asleep. The sleeping body that performs these tasks is called the night person. Rick's night person has been doing sit-ups every night, which is why Rick now has, as the episode puts it, washboard abs. He got the body he wanted without spending any of his waking time working for it. The family wants in immediately. Rick warns them that the technology is too advance for them to use safely. He says this in the specific tone he uses when he knows he is going to give in before the conversation is finished. Summer gives him a look. Rick gives in. The somnambulator takes a blood sample from each family member. Each person programs their goals. Morty wants defined abs, matching Rick's. Summer wants to become fluent in Spanish. Beth wants to learn to play the trumpet. Jerry wants to use his night person as a pen pal, writing letters to his sleeping self and receiving letters back. Rick correctly identifies this as the saddest possible use of the technology and is laughed at by nobody because everyone agrees it is a little sad, but Jerry seems happy about it. For a while, everything works. Summer comes to school and can suddenly speak Spanish at a high level. Beth plays trumpet beautifully. Morty's body changes visibly. Rick and Morty, it is revealed, have been running a podcast together in their sleep about the benefits of having strong abdominal muscles. The podcast is called The Washboard Boys. Then the Knight family begins to have opinions. It starts with the dishes. The Knight family uses the house while the Day family sleeps. They eat, they live, and the Knight family wants the Day family to rinse the dishes before leaving them in the sink. They leave a note. The note is polite. It is a reasonable request from beings who are sharing a living space and would like the shared living space to be maintained. Rick refuses to rinse the dishes. This is the decision that starts the war. It is important to understand how the episode frames this. Rick is not refusing because he has a good reason. He does not have a good reason. He refuses because the Knight family asked him to do something, and Rick does not do things because someone asked him to do them. His inability to perform one simple act of domestic cooperation, when asked politely by beings who are technically versions of himself, is what transforms a comfortable arrangement into a months-long conflict that nearly destroys the family. The Knight family retaliates. Led by Knight Summer, they strap Rick down while he is sleeping and force him to eat the food residue scraped off the dirty dishes. Rick wakes up vomiting and crying. In the morning, he drinks an entire bottle of mouthwash. He declares war. Now the episode becomes something different. Rick builds a sleep deprivation suit for Summer. The suit is designed to keep her awake by any means necessary. It includes air horns attached to each ear, hooks holding her eyelids open, forks inserted into her back, high heels to make standing painful, and a feeding tube filled with Mountain Dew and Dayquil. The goal is to keep Day Summer conscious long enough to go undercover among the Knight family, find the somnambulator, and destroy it. Destroying the somnambulator would destroy the Knight family, because the Knight family only exists while the device is running. Summer, wearing the suit, follows the Knight family down into the garage, where they have installed a larger version of the somnambulator to extend its range beyond the house. She plants a device that will disable it. She signals Rick. Rick deactivates his force field. The family begins celebrating. Summer reveals she has been Knight Summer the entire time. This is the moment the episode becomes genuinely alarming. Knight Summer was in control all along. She identified Rick's plan. She pretended to be Day Summer successfully enough that Rick, who is supposed to be the smartest being in any room he enters, could not tell the difference. She used Rick's own technology against him. The sleep deprivation suit, which Rick built to keep Day Summer conscious, was being worn by Knight Summer, who does not sleep and therefore cannot be defeated by something designed to prevent sleep. Rick did not account for this. Knight Summer did. The Knight family takes control completely. They build robots that enslave the Day family, reversing the dynamic entirely. The Day family now does chores for the Knight family, while the Knight family lives in the house. The Day family is made to burn DVDs of movies with the word Day in the title. Talladega Nights is spared because it has the word Knights in it instead. This detail is funny and also reveals that Knight Summer has a sense of humor, which makes her more frightening rather than less. The only member of the Knight family who does not participate in the war against the Day family is Knight Jerry. Jerry's decision to use his Knight person as a pen pal, which everyone found sad, has created something nobody expected. Knight Jerry has developed genuine affection for Day Jerry through their letter exchange. Knight Jerry knows Day Jerry. Knight Jerry likes Day Jerry. When Knight Summer orders the Day family treated as slaves, Knight Jerry quietly does not agree. Knight Jerry helps the Day family escape. They get to Rick's car. They drive away, trying to get beyond the range of the somnambulator so that their Knight persons cannot take over their bodies. The robots and Knight Summer give chase. The car crashes. In the wreckage, both Day and Night versions of each family member fight for control of the same bodies, knocking each other conscious and unconscious in rapid sequence. Rick slaps Knight Jerry awake, turning him into Day Jerry, losing the only ally the Day family had. This is Rick in a single action, so committed to being in opposition to the Knight family that he reflexively attacks the one member of it who is on his side, because Knight Jerry is still technically Knight, and Rick cannot stop himself from treating all of them the same. Knight Summer proposes a resolution. The Day family will rinse the dishes. The conflict ends. Rick will not do it. The Knight family wins. The post-credit scene shows what what winning looks like. Months pass. The Knight family, now in full control of the family's lives and finances, goes on expensive vacations, attends concerts, and subscribes to streaming services designed specifically for people who are awake at night. They spend everything. The bank freezes the accounts. The car gets repossessed. The Knight family is broke and exhausted and has nothing to show for the control they fought so hard to take. Knight Rick shoots the somnambulator. It shatters. The Knight family ceases to exist. The Day family wakes up confused, in debt, with no memory of how much time has passed. Rick checks the date. The Klondike Choco Taco, a popular ice cream product, has been discontinued while they were under. This is how much time has passed. Long enough for a beloved ice cream product to disappear from the market permanently. The episode ends there. Now here is what this episode is actually about beneath all of that. The writer Rob Schraub, in interviews about the making of the episode, said that the central question that shaped the episode was this: what if Summer was the big bad? The director, Jacob Hare, added that Night Summer's leadership represented Summer's real resentments toward Rick, her deep feelings about being the family member Rick overlooks, finding a shape and a form and a general in this alternate version of herself. Summer spends most of Rick and Morty being the family member the show has the least to do with. She is not Rick's adventure partner. She is not Beth, whose complicated feelings about her father drive multiple seasons of story. She is not Jerry, whose failures provide comedy. She is Summer. She watches. She is smart. She is frequently right. She is consistently sidelined. Night Summer is what happens to that sidelined intelligence when it gets a body of its own and no one to tell it to wait its turn. Night Summer outsmarts Rick. Not in a fight, not through superior technology or physical strength. She outsmarts him by understanding how he thinks and using that understanding against him. She knew Rick would come up with a plan to destroy the somnambulator. She knew he would put Summer at the center of that plan. She prepared for it. She wore the pain of the sleep deprivation suit and stayed in character and let Rick believe he had won until the exact moment it was most useful to reveal that he had not. This is what Summer has always been capable of in the show. The episode simply gave her a version of herself that had the space and the freedom and the anger to use it. And the cause of all of it? The dishes. Rick will not rinse the dishes. A man who can build a working version of a death ray from parts he already had lying around his garage cannot bring himself to run a plate underwater when someone asks him to. The war, the slavery, the lost months, the discontinued Choco Taco, all of it traces back to a domestic act of contempt so small that it barely registers in the moment Rick refuses. The show is saying something specific here. Resentment does not start with the big things. It starts with the small refusals, the small signals that someone does not consider the people they live with worth the minimum required effort. The Knight family is the accumulated weight of every time Rick treated the people in his house as obstacles or background noise, rather than people who share a space with him and have the right to ask things of him. Night Summer is what that weight looks like when it learns to fight back. The war between the Day family and the Knight family was caused by dishes. It was really caused by years of being treated as an afterthought by someone who is too brilliant and too careless to notice what that does to the people closest to him. __quote _5 ___, which makes the next episode on this list the one that takes that same idea and pushes it to its most extreme possible conclusion. Because if one Rick creates a version of his family that hates him, what happens when every version of Rick does exactly the same thing at the same time? Section 7, Multiplicity, Season 5, Episode 2. What is a family if every version of it dies? The episode begins with the family having breakfast. Rick announces that God is real, has been sleeping for thousands of years, and that he and Morty are going to sneak up into the clouds and kill him today. Beth mentions that Jerry is getting a job. Rick identifies Jerry getting a job as the more alarming piece of news. Then, squid-like creatures burst through the walls and shoot every member of the family to death, one by one, in a sequence that is graphic enough to be genuinely startling for an animated comedy. The camera cuts to a different location. A different Rick gets an alert on his watch. His alert tells him that his decoy family was just murdered. This is the first sentence of the real episode. Everything before it was a fake-out. Multiplicity aired on June 27th, 2021. It was written by Albro Lundy and directed by Lucas Gray. It is the second episode of Season 5. The writers apparently considered swapping it with the season premiere, but decided against it because it was too late to make the change. Justin Roiland, who co-created the show and voiced both Rick and Morty, said he preferred the swap, but accepted that it could not happen. The episode aired second and has lived in the middle of most people's Season 5 rankings ever since. Acknowledged as creative and ambitious, rarely discussed as one of the greats. It requires 2 watches. This is not a complaint, it is the design. On the first watch, the audience spends the episode trying to figure out which family is real. The show keeps offering candidates. A family escapes the initial attack and seems to be the genuine article for several minutes before being destroyed by another family. That family seems real for several more minutes before a third family enters and the situation collapses again. The episode is structured as a long sequence of false dawns. Every time a family survives long enough to feel stable, something eliminates them, and the ground shifts under the audience again. Here is what actually happened, which Rick explains at various points throughout the episode. After the events of the Season 4 finale, which involved a complicated situation with a duplicate version of Beth called Space Beth, Rick became aware that there were people in the universe who might want to harm his family. His solution was to create decoy families, robotic duplicates of himself and every family member, and place them in locations across the country. Any attacker looking for the real family would find a decoy instead. The real family would be protected. The problem is that each decoy was built by a version of Rick, and every version of Rick is Rick, and Rick cannot build something without building it to be self-sufficient and intelligent enough to handle situations independently. Each decoy Rick had enough intelligence to realize that the original security plan might not be sufficient. Each decoy Rick independently decided to create additional decoys as a backup measure. Each of those decoys also created decoys. Each of those did the same. The word for what this creates is an Asimov cascade, which the episode names directly. The term comes from Isaac Asimov, a science fiction writer whose work often dealt with robots and the unexpected consequences of giving machines the ability to make decisions. An Asimov cascade is what happens when a self-replicating system keeps copying itself past the point of usefulness into chaos. Rick uses the phrase in the episode because Rick knows the reference, and also because naming the disaster does not help him solve it. By the time the episode is happening, there are so many decoy families that nobody knows which one is real, including the decoys themselves. Each decoy Rick believes he might be the original. Each decoy family has developed genuine opinions and genuine relationships with each other. Each of them has their own version of the experience of being this family, and each of them has created their own decoys, and now all of them are being hunted by the squid creatures, except the squid creatures are also decoys. This is the second reveal, which lands roughly in the middle of the episode. When one of the Rick decoys captures a squid creature and removes its helmet, there is another Rick decoy underneath. The first family to discover that the squid creatures were hunting decoys disguised themselves as squid creatures to start eliminating other decoys. Then another family discovered this and did the same thing. The threat that was supposedly coming from outside the decoy network was, by the time the episode reaches its center, entirely internal. Every danger is a version of themselves. The degradation of the decoys is one of the episode's most specific and deliberate creative choices. The original decoys are indistinguishable from the real family. They are perfect copies. But each successive generation, created by a decoy rather than the original Rick, is slightly less precise. The materials get worse. The craftsmanship declines. By the time the episode reaches its later generations, there are decoy families made of glockenspiel parts, mechanical instrument components assembled into vaguely human shapes. There are decoy families that look like scarecrows. There is a decoy family made entirely of wood. The wooden family is important. Every other version of Rick in this episode, faced with the chaos of the Asimov cascade, responds the same way. They compete. They eliminate. They try to prove they are the most real by being the last one standing. This is Rick's psychology made literal. His identity is so dependent on being the smartest and most capable version of himself in any room that the existence of other versions of himself reads as a threat to be eliminated rather than a resource to be used. Wooden Rick does something different. Wooden Rick tries to save people. He and his wooden family create a hidden base. They bring other decoy families there. They try to build an alliance instead of a war. Wooden Rick, the most degraded version of Rick in the entire episode, the one made with the least care and the least skill, and the materials you would use if you had run completely out of everything else, is the only one who responds to the crisis by trying to protect other people instead of eliminating them. This does not work out well for Wooden Rick. His base is discovered and destroyed. He does not survive the episode. His attempt at cooperation achieves nothing in practical terms. But the episode noticed it. The writing noticed it. The camera noticed it. Wooden Rick's approach is given enough space and enough attention that the audience understands it is being treated as meaningful, not as a joke about how a primitive decoy made a naive mistake. The most basic and least impressive version of Rick has the most basic and least impressive response to the situation, which is to help other people, and the episode holds that up without mocking it. Meanwhile, one of the more functional decoy Ricks makes a decision that he frames as strategic and that is actually desperate. He He broadcasts a signal calling every remaining decoy family to his location. He taunts them. He tells them he has home advantage and superior confidence and what he calls absolutely pendulous balls. He tells them that the only way to prove they are real and not fake is to come and face him. He is framing a last stand as a victory. All the remaining decoys come. They fight. One family is left standing. That family is immediately killed by Mr. Always Wants to Be Hunted, a character introduced in the episode's opening minutes who is exactly what his name describes. An alien who derives something from being hunted and keeps asking people to hunt him. He kills the last standing decoy family not out of malice or plan, but simply because he is there, and this is what he does. The camera cuts to space. The real Smith family is returning from an adventure with Space Beth. Rick gets an alert. His decoys have been destroyed. He notes this, and the family continues on. They were not there for any of it. The real family, whose safety the entire decoy program was designed to protect, spent the whole episode somewhere else. Every death, every alliance, every desperate stand, every wooden Rick trying to build something cooperative, all of it happened entirely without them. The people whose lives were supposedly at stake were unreachable and uninvolved. The post-credits scene belongs to Wooden Jerry. Of all the wooden decoys, he survived by doing what Jerry always does, abandoning his family at the critical moment and hiding. He varnished himself for protection and floated away downstream. The post-credits scene then plays across what appears to be an enormous span of time. Wooden Jerry is found by beavers, who dismantle parts of him to build a dam. He wakes up in what appears to be a distant future where humans no longer exist and reptilian creatures have taken over. He ends up as a decorative piece of wood in what functions as a Western saloon. He is eventually used as the frame for a crucifix above a figure being executed. He cannot die. He just keeps existing in less and less dignified circumstances across what appears to be thousands of years of history, unable to stop and unable to end. This is the funniest and most upsetting post-credits sequence the show has ever produced. Here is what Multiplicity is actually arguing, underneath all the action and the decoy variations and the escalating chaos. The question the episode keeps asking is whether any of these families are real. The audience spends the episode trying to identify the authentic version, but the episode's answer, delivered quietly and without announcement, is that the question is wrong. Every decoy family that developed its own relationships and its own experience of being this family was real in the ways that matter. The Wooden family was real, the Glockenspiel family was real, the family that went to Italy on vacation and got destroyed while one of them was tossing a peach with an old man in a scene that references a 2017 film called Call Me By Your Name was real. They all believed they were the genuine article. They all loved each other in whatever way a decoy can love. They all died defending that belief. The original family came home and filed it under Decoys Destroyed, a notification on a watch, something to note and move past. Rick built things that became real and then did not account for what that meant. He did this in the second episode of the entire series with Snuffles. He did it here on a scale that involved hundreds of versions of his own family. The show keeps returning to this. Rick keeps creating consciousness he did not fully intend, consciousness that develops genuine inner lives, and Rick keeps treating those inner lives as acceptable losses in service of whatever plan he had at the start. The Wooden Rick who tried to help people was one of those acceptable losses. So was every version of this family that died believing it was the real one. __quote _6 ___. The show will spend the next 2 episodes on this list asking what it costs to build a system that creates suffering in order to provide something convenient. And the answer it arrives at involves spaghetti and a planet that turned its own sun gray to make its people sad enough to die. Section 8. That's Amorte 7E4. The cruelest joke is that there's no punchline. Before this episode begins, Adult Swim puts up a warning. A message appears on screen telling the audience that the episode contains depictions and discussions of suicide throughout. This is only the second time in the entire run of Rick and Morty that a content warning has appeared before an episode. The first time was for a different Season 7 episode called Analyze Piss. The warning before That's Amorte is not decorative. It is not the network being cautious about nothing. The episode earns it, and it earns it in a way that is stranger and more uncomfortable than a straightforward dark episode would be, because the warning sits in front of an episode that opens with a family having spaghetti night together. That's Amorte aired on November 5th, 2023. It was written by Heather Ann Campbell and directed by Lucas Gray. It is the 4th episode of Season 7. This is also the season where Justin Roiland, who created the show and voiced both Rick and Morty for the first 6 seasons, was no longer part of the production. Ian Cardoni took over the voice of Rick, Harry Belden took over the voice of Morty. The episode was written before Roiland's departure, but produced and aired with the new voices. Many viewers who had been skeptical about the voice changes pointed to this episode as the one where the replacements stopped being noticeable, because the writing was too good to leave room for distraction. The episode opens with spaghetti night. Rick has been hosting regular spaghetti dinners for the family. The spaghetti is, by every account from every family member, the best spaghetti any of them have ever eaten. They love it. It has become a ritual. Rick makes the spaghetti, the family eats together, and for a brief window of time, the Smith household functions as a warm and normal family doing a warm and normal thing. Morty goes to the garage. In the garage, there is a body. The body is humanoid. It looks like a person from a different species, similar enough to human to be recognizable as a person, and the body has turned into pasta. Not metaphorically. The body of this being has literally transformed into spaghetti after death, Rick explains. He takes Morty to a planet called 41 Kepler b. The planet is inhabited by a species that is, in almost every observable way, identical to humans. They live, they work, they have families and jobs and ordinary lives. They also have a biological property that no human possesses. When a member of this species commits suicide, their internal organs transform into the finest pasta in the universe. Not if they die of illness, not if they die of old age or in an accident, only if they choose to end their own life. Rick has known about this planet for some time. He has been quietly visiting it, collecting the remains of people who have died there, and serving those remains to his family on spaghetti night. Morty is horrified. He demands to know the names of the people they ate. Rick, after significant resistance, tells him. Morty insists on going to the funeral of the most recent one. Rick objects. Morty threatens to make the situation worse if Rick does not take him. Rick takes him. At the funeral, Morty stands up and tells the assembled mourners what happened to their loved one after death. He tells them that the person they are grieving became food, that he ate that person, that he is sorry for their loss and also for the sauce. The mourners are horrified. The news spreads across the planet. The planet's president contacts Morty directly. The president offers a solution. She presents Morty with what she calls ethically sourced spaghetti. A terminally ill member of the species, someone who was going to die anyway and who consented to the process, has chosen to end their life and become food. The death was willing. The transformation was consented to. Is this not different from what Rick was doing? Is consent not the line that separates ethical from unethical? Morty thinks about this. He finds the argument reasonable. The family resumes spaghetti night under the new ethical framework. Rick reveals what has happened on the planet since the news spread. The spaghetti has become the most desired food product in the known universe. Dozens of planets are buying it. The demand is enormous. The planet's economy has transformed entirely around the production and export of this spaghetti. And because demand far exceeds the number of people who are terminally ill and willing to consent to the process, the planet's government has begun taking additional steps to increase production. They have removed all mental health resources from the planet. Every support system that existed to help struggling people has been dismantled. The television programming across the entire planet has been replaced with content designed to make viewers feel hopeless and worthless. The color of the planet's sun has been changed to what the episode describes as institutional gray, a color designed to make the environment feel as bleak as possible. The government of this planet has engineered a civilization-wide depression with the specific goal of encouraging more of its citizens to choose to die so that their bodies can be processed and sold. Rick notes that changing the color of a sun is actually extremely difficult, and that whoever authorized it was genuinely committed to the project. The ethically sourced spaghetti that Morty approved of was real. The consent was real. The terminal illness was real. And the system built around that ethical framework immediately used the appearance of ethics as a cover for creating suffering on a massive industrial scale. The line that Morty drew, consent is what separates acceptable from unacceptable, was real when he drew it, and the planet's government stepped over it the moment it became inconvenient for profits. Morty tries to solve this. He and Rick attempt to create a synthetic version of the spaghetti that does not require anyone to die. They go through multiple attempts. Rick builds clones of the species and tries to engineer the transformation artificially. 2 clones escape, run from the facility, and shoot each other rather than be turned into food. The synthetic approach fails. Every scientific solution they can think of fails. Rick proposes a different approach. There is a man on the planet named Fred Bunks. Fred is terminally ill. He has lived a full life. He has agreed to participate in Rick's experiment as the final willing subject. Rick's plan is to broadcast every moment of Fred's entire life on a screen that every consumer of the spaghetti across the universe can see simultaneously. Every planet that is currently buying and eating this spaghetti will watch, in real time, the complete life of the person they are about to consume. What follows is the best 2 minutes of Season 7. 7. A cover of the Oasis song Live Forever plays. The song is performed by artists named Kotomi and Ryan Elder. The original song is about wanting to exist forever, about not wanting to lose the people you love, about the specific human desire to make things last. Over this song, Fred Bunk's life plays out in a montage without any dialogue. Fred wanted to be an architect. He studied for it. He failed out of school. He found a different path, making building blocks for children, and discovered that this smaller version of the same idea was something he was genuinely good at and genuinely loved. He fell in love with someone in his youth. They separated. He eventually found her again, but by then she had built a life with someone else and had children. He met someone new. He built something with that person instead. His life did not follow the shape that stories usually give lives. There was no single triumph. There was no clear moment where everything came together. There was just a specific person living specific days, failing at some things, finding others, loving people imperfectly, being loved imperfectly back. Fred dies on screen. His body becomes spaghetti. Rick serves it. Neither Morty nor any of the universe's consumers can eat it. Not because the spaghetti looks bad or smells wrong, because they just watched Fred's entire life. Because Fred is not an ingredient anymore. Fred is a person. They know. In the limited but real way that watching someone's whole life makes you know them. The spaghetti is still spaghetti. What changed is that the people looking at it can no longer separate the food from the person. Rick watches this happen. He picks up a fork. He tastes the spaghetti. He puts the fork down. Rick, who has spent 7 seasons arguing that nothing matters and that caring is a mistake and that the rational response to existence is detachment, Rick cannot eat the spaghetti either. He watched Fred's life. Fred got to him. The nihilism that Rick uses as armor has a limit, and that limit is apparently a building block manufacturer from another planet who fell in love twice and failed at architecture and died having lived a life that was real in all the small ways that lives are real. Morty says to Rick that he could not change everyone's taste buds, but he could make it distasteful. Rick's response is the most honest thing Rick says in season 7. He tells Morty that if Morty is asking whether this was a story about right and wrong, the answer is that Rick does not care. He says that cells consume, that life itself is built on consumption, that this means life is wrong and death is right by any logical measure. But he says that Morty cannot side with that. Nobody can side with that. So you live, even when living means consuming things you would rather not think about. The episode ends with the family eating Salisbury steak. Rick promises he obtained it from another ethically questionable source. The family chooses not to ask. They eat the steak and enjoy it because not knowing is easier than knowing. And they have just spent the whole episode learning that this is true for everyone everywhere, and that the knowing does not necessarily make anyone behave better. The writer Heather Ann Campbell said in an interview that the episode is about how people are kept away from the truth of everything they enjoy, that we are the only animals who think about the ethics of what we eat, and that the puzzle of being alive is figuring out how to deal with that awareness. Dan Harmon said the episode was designed to be therapeutically dark rather than punishingly dark, to push you toward the uncomfortable thing without leaving you there with no way out. The way out the episode offers is not a solution. It is Fred Bunk's, a man who failed and loved and kept going, a man whose life was real enough that even Rick Sanchez could not finish his dinner after watching it. This is the closest the show has come to saying directly that the antidote to nihilism is not an argument. It is a specific person. It is knowing someone well enough that their realness becomes impossible to dismiss. The next episode on this list is about forgetting, about the adventures Rick and Morty have had that nobody recorded, that nobody cataloged, that exist only as memories in a punch card system Morty has been maintaining on his own because he learned, somewhere along the way, that if he does not keep track of these things, nobody will. Section 9, Rickfending Your Mort, Season 7, Episode 6. A clip show about episodes that never happened. The episode opens with Morty finding Rick passed out on the garage floor. Rick is drunk. He is blowing raspberries at nothing. He has no interest in moving, going anywhere, doing anything, or engaging with the world in any meaningful way. This is Rick after the events of the previous episode, called Unmortrican, in which Rick finally killed the man who murdered his wife and destroyed his family years before the show began. Rick spent multiple seasons building toward that moment. He achieved it, and now he is on the floor of the garage making mouth sounds because completing the thing you built your life around turns out to leave a specific kind of emptiness that revenge fantasies never account for. Morty has a solution. He pulls out a stack of punch cards. The punch cards are Morty's adventure record system. Every time he and Rick go on an adventure, Morty stamps a card. He has been doing this for a long time, apparently without Rick knowing or caring that the system existed. The cards have accumulated. Morty has enough stamps to cash in for an adventure of his choosing, meaning Rick owes him a trip. flip, and Morty intends to collect. Rick disputes the cards. He thinks Morty has been faking stamps. He thinks the number of adventures recorded does not match his own memory of how many adventures they have actually had. Rather than simply argue about this, Rick calls in an outside party to settle the dispute. The outside party is an observer. Rickfending Your Mort aired on November 19, 2023. It was written by Cody Ziegler, who was a new addition to the writing staff that season and had been working as a story editor on the earlier Season 7 episodes. This episode was his first writing credit on the show. It was directed by Jacob Hare, who also directed Night Family. It is the 6th episode of Season 7, arriving one episode after the devastating Unmortrican. The Observer is a floating rock. It is a member of a species that exists specifically to watch everything. Every observer can see and record everything that has ever happened to anyone at any time. They are the universe's perfect surveillance system, and they have the personality of someone who has been given enormous power and has chosen to use it to make other people uncomfortable. The observer assigned to Rick and Morty's case begins displaying footage of their adventures to determine which of Morty's punch cards are legitimate. This is where the episode becomes something unusual. The footage the observer displays is not from any episode the audience has ever seen. These are not clips from the show's previous 7 seasons being replayed in a new context. Every single adventure the observer shows is brand new material. These things actually happened to Rick and Morty. They are presented as real events in the show's history. They simply were never shown to the audience before this episode. This is the move the episode makes that separates it from a standard clip show. A standard clip show replays existing footage to fill time. This episode creates new footage and presents it as existing history, which does something different. It makes the show's world feel larger. Rick and Morty have been having adventures the audience never witnessed. There is a version of their history that exists off-screen, and that the show has only occasionally acknowledged. The Observer pulls from that off-screen history and makes it briefly visible. Some of what the Observer shows is simple. Rick gave Morty several guns over the years without adequately explaining what each gun was for, and Morty kept misusing them in embarrassing ways. There was a gun that was designed to kill gorillas. Morty used it on a school bully, which caused significant injury but did not turn the bully into a gorilla, which was what Morty had been hoping for. Rick's response was to question why Morty would even want to turn a bully into a gorilla, since a gorilla bully would be considerably more dangerous than a regular bully. There was an adventure where Rick and Morty experimented with a burial technique from a Stephen King novel called Pet Sematary, in which things buried in a specific location come back to life after death. Rick and Morty tested this on various objects and people with results that were uniformly terrible. The episode shows only a fragment of this, but establishes it as something that genuinely happened and had consequences. There was an adventure involving a sentient churro. Rick, at Morty's request, gave life to a churro. The churro's name, once given life, was Churi. Morty and Churi became close. Then Morty discovered that Churi was immortal and would never die. And Morty panicked about the long-term implications of this and abandoned Churi on another planet rather than deal with it. Churi swore revenge. Churi is still out there. The episode establishes this and then moves past it, leaving Churi as an unresolved thread that the show has not yet picked up. Rick also killed the versions of himself and Morty that appeared in the 2021 film Space Jam: A New Legacy, a real movie in which animated characters from various properties, including Rick and Morty, made brief appearances. The episode presents this mercy killing as a straightforward and reasonable action that Rick performed without much deliberation. This is funny for the obvious reasons, and also because it is the show acknowledging something it was clearly uncomfortable with and deciding that the cleanest way to handle it was to have Rick eliminate the evidence. The Observer, having established itself as a useful device for displaying these clips, begins to develop its own agenda. When Rick and Morty try to end the session, the Observer refuses to leave. It parks itself in front of the house and keeps showing clips, now without being asked, choosing moments designed to cause maximum embarrassment. It shows clips of the family's worst moments to the family. It shows Summer things she would rather not have displayed. It shows Beth and Space Beth things about each other. The only family member who is unbothered is Jerry, because Jerry has long since made peace with the fact that his worst moments are visible to everyone who knows him. Rick and Morty end up on trial. The Observer's species convenes a cosmic court to evaluate whether Rick and Morty deserve to be executed for the accumulated evidence of their behavior across all the clips that have been shown. The trial is run entirely by observers, meaning the judge, the jury, the prosecution, and the defense are all members of the same species that has already decided it does not like Rick and Morty. Rick hacks the system. He gains control of the Observer's display technology and turns it on the observers themselves. He shows the court footage of various observers engaged in their own bad behavior. One observer failed to help a drowning person and instead watch them drown, which is technically consistent with their purpose, but morally inexcusable. Multiple observers have been selling bootleg recordings of movies they observed being filmed, including several films that have not been released yet. An observer paid homeless people to fight each other for entertainment. The whataboutism works. The observers descend into internal chaos, arguing about their own footage. Rick and Morty escape. The episode ends with Rick and Morty flying off on a new adventure. Rick tells Morty to look in the glove compartment. Morty opens it and finds another strange gun. He is excited. He has learned nothing about strange guns. What this episode is actually doing is less about the specific adventures it shows and more about the structure it uses to show them. Dan Harmon, who co-created Rick and Morty, also created an earlier show called Community. Community did a fake clip show episode in its second season called Paradigms of Human Memory, in which characters remembered events from adventures that the audience had never seen. This is widely considered one of the best episodes Community ever produced. Rickfending Your Mort is doing the same thing, and it is doing it consciously because Harmon built both shows and both episodes use the format for the same underlying purpose, to make the world of the show feel bigger than what the camera has captured. The punch cards matter in this context. Morty has been keeping records. He has been maintaining documentation of a shared history that Rick barely acknowledges and never bothered to preserve himself. The punch cards are Morty's proof that their time together has been worth tracking. Rick disputes them, not because he believes Morty is lying, but because Rick does not want to believe that so much of their shared history requires Morty to be the one who remembers it. The observer forces Rick to look at that history. Not the history Rick would choose to look at, not the moments Rick would select to represent their partnership, but the full and embarrassing and real history of everything they have done together. Rick escapes the trial. He does not escape what the trial showed him. The episode does not make a big deal of this. Rick is functional again by the end. He is back to himself, ready for the next adventure, glove compartment gun in hand. The depression that opened the episode has lifted, not because anything was resolved, not because Rick processed his grief or found meaning in what he accomplished, but because the chaotic mess of his actual life turned out to be more sustaining than lying on the garage floor. The clutter of it pulled him out. The Churi situation and the gorilla gun and all the small disasters of being Rick Sanchez are, apparently, enough of a reason to keep going. Quote 8 This is the quietest version of the argument the whole essay has been building toward, and the final section is where that argument lands completely. Section 10. What the forgotten episodes are actually about. Rick's theory of survivable pain. Every episode in this essay ends the same way. Not with the same scene, not with the same tone, but with the same shape. Something real happens to someone. Something that costs them in a way that cannot be undone or fixed or argued away. And then life continues around that cost, as though it was always going to be part of the landscape. Nobody announces it. Nobody processes it out loud in a way that resolves into growth or change or a lesson learned and carried forward. The wound is there. The life continues. Both things are true at the same time, and the show refuses to choose between them. Snowball says goodbye to Morty and flies away to a planet where dogs can live without becoming what humanity made them. He leaves the one creature who loved him because staying would require repeating the same cycle of domination and loss. He goes. The episode ends. The next episode does not mention him. Rick wakes up on his workbench in the garage, having survived the night by accident. The death ray is still pointed at the chair he was sitting in. Jerry is outside with the weed whacker. The morning is ordinary. Nobody came. Rick wakes up and the show moves on. Tony dies on a ski slope trying to live more fully after a conversation with Rick that Rick could not admit mattered to him. Rick goes to the funeral. He gives Tony's father money and the means to potentially clone Tony, and then clarifies 3 times that he and Tony were not friends. He goes back to the planet. He sits on the toilet. The holograms mock him with a crown. The Night family fights a war over dishes, wins, runs out of money, and destroys itself. The Day family wakes up to find months have passed and the Choco Taco is gone. No explanation is given to the family for any of it. They simply wake up into a world that has moved on without them. Every Decoy Smith family dies, believing it was the real one. The real family comes home from space. Rick gets a notification. He notes it. The adventure continues. Fred Bunks becomes spaghetti. Rick puts down his fork. The family eats Salisbury steak instead. Nobody asks where the Salisbury steak came from because they have just learned that not knowing is the version of this they can live with. Rick gets off the garage floor because the chaotic mess of his actual history, displayed against his will by a floating rock with a grudge, turns out to be more reason to keep going than he had when he was lying there making mouth sounds. This is the pattern. 8 episodes across 7 seasons, spread across the full run of the show, written by different writers in different rooms in different years, and every single one of them arrives arrives at the same place. The thing happens. The loss is real. The show continues. This is not an accident, and it is not nihilism. Here's what nihilism actually means in simple terms. Nihilism is the belief that nothing has meaning, that nothing matters, that caring about anything is a mistake because the universe does not care back. Rick Sanchez says this constantly. He has said it in every season the show has produced. He says it with confidence, and he says it like he believes it, and a significant portion of the audience found this cool, especially early in the show's run when Rick was at his most effortlessly capable, and his philosophy seemed like the natural conclusion of being smart enough to see the universe clearly. The forgotten episodes are the show's sustained argument that Rick does not believe any of it. Look at the evidence. A man who genuinely believed nothing mattered would not build a private toilet on an alien planet and visit it alone for the specific purpose of having one thing that belongs entirely to him. He would not care whether anyone used it. He would not spend the episode crossing the galaxy and accidentally starting and finishing a robot war over a broken tree branch near his private seat. The toilet is not about hygiene. The toilet is about needing something that is his, which is only a need if things matter, which Rick claims they do not. A man who genuinely believed nothing mattered would not keep a suffering creature frozen in his garage. He would not thaw it and hold it gently and speak to it softly before ending its pain. He would not do any of that with the tenderness the scene shows him using. You do not comfort something you believe is meaningless. You only comfort something if its experience registers to you as real and worth responding to. Rick responded to it. The components of the death ray were already assembled. He had already decided what he was going to do to himself, and he still stopped first to make sure the creature was not alone at the end. A man who genuinely believed nothing mattered would not taste Fred Bunks' spaghetti and put the fork down. He would eat it. The food is food. The philosophy he claims to hold says that Fred's life was a collection of meaningless events in a meaningless universe, and that the pasta it produced is just pasta. Rick picked up the fork and put it down because Fred's life got to him. A real, specific human life lived imperfectly and fully and completely, broke through the armor of a philosophy Rick has been building and reinforcing for longer than the show has existed. The nihilism is the performance. The garage is the truth. And here is the harder part of this argument. The show does not fix Rick. None of these episodes repair him. He does not wake up from the garage night and enter season 3 as a changed person. He does not sit on the toilet under the hologram crown and decide to let people in. He does not watch Fred Bunk's life and emerge from the experience with a new understanding of how to be present with the people around him. He wakes up, he goes back out, he does the next thing. He is still Rick. This is the part of the show that the forgotten episodes carry that the famous episodes mostly do not. The famous episodes let Rick be triumphant. They let him win. They let the audience feel the satisfaction of watching someone brilliant succeed at something difficult. The forgotten episodes show what happens in the spaces between the wins. They show the shape of a life that is genuinely remarkable and genuinely painful and genuinely unchanged by the pain. Not because the pain does not matter, but because the person carrying it does not know what else to do except keep going. This is survivable pain. Not pain that gets resolved, not pain that becomes wisdom, pain that becomes part of the load and gets carried along with everything else because there is no other option available. Snowball understands this when he chooses to leave. He could stay. He loves Morty. The love is real, and the episode earns it honestly. He leaves anyway because staying would mean becoming the thing he hated, and he would rather carry the loss of Morty than repeat the cycle of cruelty that created him. He takes the pain with him as the better option. The Decoy families understand this in reverse. Every version of the Smith family that died in Multiplicity believed it was the genuine article. They fought to prove they were real. They died in that belief. The show treated their deaths as meaningful enough to follow carefully, and as meaningless enough that the real family filed them under notifications. Both things are true. The decoys were real in the ways that counted, and disposable in the ways that Rick's plans always make things disposable. The Knight family understands this when Knight Rick shoots the somnambulator. They won the war. They had everything they wanted. The winning was not worth what it cost. They chose to end themselves rather than continue in a version of victory that had hollowed itself out. This is a specific and unusual kind of wisdom that the show gives to versions of Rick and Summer who exist only in this one episode and are then gone. And Rick on the garage floor understands it too, eventually, which is why he gets up. Not because the adventure punch cards solved anything. Not because the observer's footage made him feel better about himself or about what he has spent his life doing. He gets up because the full messy record of his actual life, displayed without his permission by a floating rock with a superiority complex, turned out to contain enough material to be be worth continuing. The Churi situation is unresolved. The gorilla gun was a disaster. The Space Jam versions of himself required mercy killing. The history is embarrassing and complicated and real. It is enough. Barely, but enough. This is what the Forgotten Episodes are collectively arguing across 7 seasons and 8 stories. Not that everything is fine. Not that the pain resolves. Not that Rick will eventually change, or that the people around him will stop being hurt by proximity to him, or that any of the losses covered in this essay were worth what they cost. None of that is true, and the show knows none of that is true. The argument is simpler and harder than any of that. You absorb the thing, you carry it, you go back out. The going back out is not triumph. It is not healing. It is just the next thing after the thing that hurt. And the show treats that next thing as quietly, stubbornly, undramatically worth doing. Rick Sanchez woke up in his garage. Snowball found a planet where dogs could live with dignity. Tony died skiing. The Choco Taco was discontinued. Fred Bunks was a real person. The decoys believed they were real, and they were right to believe it. And somewhere in the show's universe, on a river downstream from a battlefield of destroyed robot families, a wooden Jerry is still floating, unable to die, unable to stop, moving forward because forward is the only direction available. That is the show in one image. That is what the Forgotten Episodes were always about. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.